Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to our afternoon session. Before we start anything, let us have Mr. Luis Pasco Pino, who is the president of Ateneo Obrero of Gijón.
Gracias, señor Devlin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Devlin. A pleasure to be here with you and also with my colleagues here at the panel, José Manuel Obeso, Ceferino, Maestú, Unturbe. A pleasure to share this panel with you at the 10th World Conference on Bioethics. Good afternoon. I am here to chair the debate. The most scientific part will be led by Mr. David Mosoya, who is Director of Medicine at the Hospital Malawi. But briefly, if you allow me, I would like to show our thanks and gratitude to Mr. Marcelo Palacios, the President of the Scientific Committee of CB, for having invited us to participate in this Congress focused on youth and environmental protection, topics that are very close to us in our everyday activity. Furthermore, this year we have recently signed an agreement, a collaboration agreement that will be started in December with a joint collaboration or action and many years to come of future collaborations, we hope, fruitful collaboration not only for both entities, the CB and the Ateneo Obrero de Gijón, but also for the whole city of Gijón and all of you, because we will together be able to launch debates on this large and passionate field of bioethics and science. That is all from me. Thank you very much. I will now give the floor to Mr. Debling again to continue with the scientific part of the panel. Thank you.
At this time, let us start with our presentations. And our first speaker, there is a slight change of program, a very slight change. Our first speaker is Mr. Ceferino Maestro Unturbe. He's the Director of Bioelectric Magnetism Laboratory of Centre of Biomedical Technology, and he's also a Doctor of Medicine. So his topic is on biological and behavioral risk, the use of wireless communication systems in the youth.
No está puesto, ¿no?
¿Lo quieren en pantalla completa?
Sí. Después se pasa aquí, ¿no?
Sí,
se pasa con esto.
Sí, se pasa con eso.
No, buenas tardes.
Good afternoon. This is siesta time, unfortunately, for Spain, so it will be tough time for me. I was very much interested in the students attending this session because partially the youth will be part of my presentation as well, so it will be of their interest. I lead a research center, the CTB, a Center for Biomedical Technology. We do research from a cellular standpoint, animal research, human animals as well, on the application of electromagnetic fields and the therapeutical changes to health. It is located in Madrid, Pozuelo de Alarcón, and it depends on the Polytechnic University of Madrid. This presentation basically will focus on a problem that I think is crucial of public health, environment, and human rights. It is a problem not only from a scientific standpoint, but, and because we are here at a bioethics congress, it is an ethical problem because subjects that get this radiation are not regarding as agents of the process, active agents. We are passive agents of that process, ignoring the population when establishing any kind of application of this new technology. Advance of progress, advance of interconnection of the world is above right to health. And the first right is right to information that is being violated. Most of us, most of the inhabitants are very little informed about what is happening or will happen. The logo you see here below, it is related to a campaign launched in USA that is called You Have a Right to Know. That is, population has a right to know how electromagnetic fields are being polluted and who is polluting them, but we lack that information. The use of control technologies based on electromagnetic fields have two kinds of consequences. I will try to address them briefly. Firstly, the level of radiation the population is exposed to and the potential consequences to health. And secondly, it is a more behavioral aspect. It has to do with the addictive nature of the use of communication systems in the daily life of the youngsters. But let's start by knowing what we're talking about when mentioning electromagnetic radiations. But these radiations are consequent to life. There could not be life on the planet without this kind of radiation. However, that life that has been adapted to a level of radiation has its origins in three phenomena that make up the electromagnetic exposure of human beings. First, sun radiation, solar radiation. It is protected by a circle that allows us to be protected against the high-intensity radiation. Second, the terrestrial electromagnetic field, used mainly by animals for orientation processes and to behave with reference to the surface of the Earth. And third, the constant deep polarization when the rays fall onto the surface of the Earth. This is a natural phenomenon required by the planet to maintain the balance of this space of a stratosphere that balances our situation. Around 1 million of rays every hour occur on the planet, and that maintains the balance on the Earth. But since electricity was discovered, the generation of a great amount of new electromagnetic environmental fields, electromagnetic fields to the environment generated artificially. These artificial fields are fields to which the biological system has not been adapted, and therefore we do not know accurately the consequences of these new fields. They are the ones used for communication purposes, to transport energy, or the ones used in any device we have in our house. And the use is power as the basic element. To know what we're talking about, what we're handling, here you can see what we call electromagnetic spectrum. That is the set of radiations and the frequencies that some time of effect is happening. For many years, the capacity of having an impact on health depending on the division of these electromagnetic fields into phenomena. What we call ionizing effect or non-ionizing effect. Ionizing effect was the one that had enough energy to break with the molecules' bonds. And the non-ionizing, did not have enough energy and therefore no effects. This is the normal model we have had so far to establish all kind of legal framework regarding electromagnetic fields. No other effect has been acknowledged, for example, thermal effect. In recent years, the non-ionizing effects Apart from that one, another one has been acknowledged, the thermal effect, that is the capacity of the microwaves to induce temperature, increase of temperature in tissues. That is why when you speak on the cell phone for a while and then you say, oh my God, my ear is getting hot and hot. And that's why radio frequency is being used in medicine to heat up tissues. And that's why we use the microwave in our house to heat up water. Well, you can see here on the slide that there are many parameters that depend mainly on the characteristic of the signal emitted. The frequency, the length wave, intensity, and duration. Those parameters determine the impact on the biological system. They are complex parameters, difficult to be understood, and therefore difficult to be quantified, but we are making headway. Let's say that biological systems, so human beings, have just one receptor of electromagnetic field. The only one we have is human eye. The eye is a receptor, is a part of the spectrum devoted to loop visibly. We are adapted to it throughout the history. To the other frequencies, we neglect them because we're not adapted to them. We do not have special sensorial organs, so we have some defense or alarm systems, and we do not know when they happen or they do not happen. So in fact, today here, we are subject to lots of electromagnetic fields. We have here a Wi-Fi device, up there some screens for Wi-Fi systems. We have the headsets with also a Bluetooth link with that system. We all in our pockets have a cell phone on standby, but emitting signals. So we have many electromagnetic fields right now here surrounding us, but we are not capable of perceiving them. We cannot perceive them. We do not have the initial capacity to say, this is causing us a problem or not. And this is very important because we do not have a capacity to prevent it or to defend ourselves against them. Our system can only be defended against whatever has sensors, something visible. What kind of radiations do we usually use in our everyday life? All kind of house devices, emergency services or systems, radar systems, wireless systems, remote control systems, cell phones, Wi-Fi systems, induction kitchen, microwaves, you name it. So many devices that are generating an electromagnetic field. First question we should ask ourselves is, what is more harmful? The communication systems, when someone puts up an antenna nearby and we're getting the radiation, or the Wi-Fi system that is surrounding us? Here you have a graph that illustrates the relative relationship between a mobile antenna 100 meters away, that is the efficient normal distance. If you look through the window, you will see a big post. We are more or less at the good distance for efficient radiation from that antenna. But however, we do not pay much attention to the computer, this computer or any computer, any laptop that we have close by. Look at the difference of the relative radiation rate. What is the difference? Well, the difference lies on the fact that the frequency used by mobile telephony is a special frequency, 800, 1100, whereas the frequency rate used by the laptop is indicated by the Wi-Fi frequency around 2.45 Hz. Do you know what the frequency is used by the microwave? The same one as the Wi-Fi. So they both heat up and they have the similar effect. I mean that we are using Wi-Fi as something generic, when in fact it is using a frequency that is very important, because 2.45 Hertz is the resonance frequency of hydrogen, So most of us have hydrogens in the organism to think that nothing is happening, and nothing is happening. We can continue living. Look at the measurement inside a hospital, pediatrics department. What is the average radio frequency they are receiving? Look at the bars to the left. You can see here that what is happening is that there is a huge increase in the frequency rate given by the cell phones used by physicians, and whereas the Wi-Fi does not have a high rate. But this is not a constant. Look at this graph below. For some time here, pediatrics system of radiation was activated, that is the cell phone of a nurse, and look at the average of radiation. Why am I showing you this? Well, so that you can understand that the whole system is unknown and we have no control over it. In the future, we will be facing a huge revolution in terms of communications. They will be used in a mass way. There will be a new communication system, 5G, that will implement the Internet of Things. Internet of Things, IoT. What is the meaning of that? Well, that means that the whole everyday life, our everyday life will be interconnected. All our electric devices and any element or device we usually use will be connected to a network. And those washing machines, the fridges, if you need more tomatoes and the fridge, or if the washing machine has finished, will send you a message wherever you are. The car will not need a driver. All this will generate a new type of electromagnetic radiation that will be surrounding us. And it is unstoppable. We will see it when it is happening. We will have interconnected cities all around, massive interconnections in terms of production, transport, hospital use, health. We all think it is a progress of society and advance. However, that comes hand in hand with many issues, many problems. What we call Internet of Things will lead to the fact that everybody will be directly located, controlled, and we can measure through sensors each of the aspects of the development, of their development and activity. But not only through augmented reality, AR, that will allow us to locate subjects. Changes in communication processes will occur. Changes in the disappearance of cars as we know them today. The idea is that a driverless car will take you anywhere just by the use of a communication. And all the communication systems will be implemented related to safety and energy transportation in an integrated world, a kind of a holistic world, all that located in an external element, the cloud. It will be faster, will have greater capacity, and look at the last item. Connection density will be greater. It will go from 100,000 connections per square meter to 1 million connections per square meter. What is the meaning of this? Well, the volume of connectivity of systems, the capacity of the system will be so huge that it will lead to whole connectivity. The forecasts given by many operators by 2020, there will be 4 34 billions of devices connected to internet. American billions. 9,000 million of cell phones. We are 6,500 million of inhabitants, and we have 8,000 million. So we have more cell phones than people on Earth. And more than 72% of the world population will be connected to some other communication system, and everything up in the cloud. That means that we will not be able to control that process. There will be external elements, organizations, states that control the whole information expansion process upon the cloud, and everything costs money. Of course, it will not be for free, and we will not be the owners. For this process to happen, it is necessary to modify the control system through antennas. And I'm saying this, it is a bit technical, but it's necessary. Current antennas work on a system that is called coverage. You go with cell phone and you see the coverage. But this system will disappear shortly. Coverage system radiates an area. The new antenna system means that the antenna will follow you up, whatever you do, until you change to another antenna radio. So antennas may differentiate. Why? Well, because each antenna will have a great capacity of interrelating with many devices. It will not be like the current antennas with a specific capacity. It will have a greater capacity. So here at the corner you have an example of the new antennas. And in a very short period of time, the number of antennas will have to be multiplied. Here you have a simulation by Samsung company regarding the new antennas necessary. If you look at this map, the whole coverage area, almost at every corner, you need an antenna so that there is enough power density to communicate with others. And the antennas will not be like the ones we know now. They will be very small, and we will almost not see them. They will be as big as a small coin. That is an antenna. Those antennas will have a great capacity, and they need to have a great density of power. So the number of antennas will be multiplied by more than 100. Just to say something, because we don't know what the final model will be about. Antennas, what for? Well, basically to establish density models that are enough to guide the vehicles, so that electromagnetic density, higher than the current one, allows to guide driverless vehicles, and that is the main objective. Of course, that gives rise to the fact that our cell phones will not be useful anymore. So new cell phones are being developed on 5G, and shortly we will be able to buy the 5G cell phones.
What changes in this model of population? Well, of course, there's a clear increase in the number of antenna, one on each corner, and probably the Wi-Fi systems that we know today will have disappeared because the antennas will substitute that whole system. We won't need a router with a Wi-Fi at home. The antenna are going to be very small, protected by the current regulation. We won't know where they are. We don't know who's going to place them and where they're going to be. There will be an increase, although not quantified, of the radiated power density we're going to receive, as these new frequencies will require more antenna and more power than they used before. There'll be greater bandwidth, etc. And what is more important is that we don't have the instruments to measure the average radiation that each person or each house is going to receive. In the US, the AT&T company has used 5G for the first time in 23 cities. And there's an alliance of 3 companies, Ericsson and AT&T, to establish these new frequencies. It's no longer a theory, it's a reality, and it is occurring today. In Europe, there's a directive on 5G for Europe and an action plan for installation. Within 2 years, the whole development will have been carried out. This is the action plan. Our country has also made up for lost time, and it has also decided on a national plan, 5G, to be developed as soon as possible. What new elements does it include? Well, here we can see some of the new frequency that are going to be used. We use 800, 1800 at the present time. Here we can see 3.4, 3.6, 700 megahertz, and 26 gigas. In some places, they're talking about 40 or even 80. So the tendency is to grow. Tests are already being carried out. We're having the first tests are being carried out. The government has given 20 million euros, earmarked 20 million euros, and the cities chosen are Segovia and Talavera de la Reina. These cities are now in phase 2 to set up 5G. And here we can see the timeline for 5G in 2018 and 2019. We are not something about something that's going to be carried out in the future. It is being done now. What effects is all of this going to have? We still don't really know about the electromagnetic fields that have been used until now. We still have to find out a lot of things. Researchers are telling the authorities to wait for a moratorium until we know what consequences there's going to be. The effects on a biological level, cellular level, animal level, well, we really don't have that much experience to know what the results or consequences will be. There will be an increase in radiation more than 1,000 times more than we have today, and we don't know the consequences of all of that. As occurs in all cases like this, it says we're going to set up a plan, we're going to implement a plan, and then we'll see what happens, and then establish the measures necessary when everything has already been implemented. If we study the normal background of the population over a long period of time, we can see the different frequencies. We can see until the year 2010, the radiation rates that we are submitted to. And with 5G, we'll probably have to multiply this by 100 at least. So things are going to change a great deal. You probably aren't familiar with the health protection measures. Well, these are done in agreement with the exposure. This is done by the International Council on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection that established the limits of emission that a person receives. I'm saying this because there are often mistakes because the emissions into the air. These is the emissions received by a person. In Spain, as you can see, we follow the EU directive for regulations, and 900 is the frequency used by the mobile phones today. and 1/800 per square meter. What do we scientists recommend? Not to go over 1.0 microvats, 4,000 less, because at those levels we are finding biological effects. But that isn't the worst thing. In Laken University, they have compared different countries, and if these countries have taken all of this into account, in the US, in the UK, we can see the radiation rate that is permitted, whereas there are other countries such as Italy, which is 10 microwatts per square meter. We can see the difference here on the scale. In Austria and Salzburg, it's 0.1. And so the question is, do the mobile phones work there? Do they work in the same way as they do here? So in that case, why do we expose the population to such high exposure to rates? Why do we do this when we know there can be biological effects? But the reason is for commercial reasons. And the new implementation of 5G, we're going to have to increase the exposure levels. The reaction density in 2G, we've got the reaction is 6 microvats per square meter, and with 6, this increases up to 18, more or less, microvats per square meter. And this gives us an idea of the clear increase that is going to occur in radiation rates. So we're now going to have a look at the biological effects that energy generated by these emissions can cause. Well, basically, we have a thermal effect. I've already talked about that, a non-thermal effect. What are the bases, the fundamental aspects? Well, our first effect is the inductive response, the capacity to produce currents by induction in our system, bearing in mind our nervous system and considering it like a wiring, and it does induce currents in the system. A second effect would be the resonance effect. Certain molecular structures or biological structures resound at certain frequencies, as we know. I've already talked about hydrogen. And finally, those of you who know something about cellular biology, the changes in the cellular membrane related to the ionic reorientation process, depending on the attack angle. I haven't time to enter into detail in this regard. These are some of the effects. What other things, aspects do we have to know about? All of these parameters enable us to have a closer look at the radiation. So what do we still have to learn about? A lot of things. We have to know a lot of things to be able to provide answers. Proteins, gene expression, activity. We don't know the individual sensitivity in the population. We don't know the effects of co-exposures to 3G, 4G, and 5G. We don't know the processes that occur in our skin. We don't know the effects of 5G on our skin or brain cancer, other tissues. We don't know the changes in impermeability or barriers. We don't know the reaction in neurodegenerative processes, Alzheimer, Parkinson's. We don't know about the processes related to genotoxic processes and repair of DNA, and we don't know what changes can occur in fertility. These are unknown effects. There are more than 25,000 articles have been published on the effects, but none in these aspects. We still don't know the majority of the consequences that can occur. In scientific literature, you can find a lot of articles about the positive and negative effects, saying that the scientific community doesn't reach an agreement. And this has gone on since the 50s of the last century. But in this world of confusion, of controversy, nothing has changed. Everything remains the same. If you review all of these articles, we can see that the consequences of the electromagnetic fields are the majority. In this study by Fistenberg, we can see certain types of pathologies related to the exposure. On the left-hand side of this graph, we can see how these aspects have been regulated in the different countries. We are recommending this level. Despite that, you can see where there are a lot of consequences that can be measured. Some clear aspects, like sleep disorders. The Spanish Neurology Society published a study a month ago about how we Spanish people sleep. 40% of Spaniards have problems in sleeping, and a lot of these problems have to do with the use of the electromagnetic fields. The alarm, for example, in your bedside table. We know there are a lot of studies that this produces problems in our sleeping process. There are a lot of pathologies that the most important isn't cancer, although it is one of them. There are many things in daily lives that are affected: sleep, fatigue, etc. But there is a new pathology too acknowledged, which is electromagnetic hypersensitivity. There are people that have hypersensitivity to syndromes associated with exposure to electromagnetic fields, and which don't allow them to lead their daily lives. If you could finish to continue with the next speaker. I've still got a few slides. This isn't an invention of some scientists. It is something said by the European Union. We have these studies on hypersensitivity made by Cox in the UK. A lot of the symptoms are those that you can see here on the slide. I don't have time to tell you about that. The estimated prevalence is increasing with increased exposure to the fields, and in the future it will increase even more. We're going to have more and more pathologies associated with this. This is the forecast of what is going to occur over the coming years until year 2020. And we also know that the World Health Organization has classified radio frequency electromagnetic fields as possibly carcinogenic into humans. It seems, therefore, that the WHO acknowledges the consequences. We do know that the number of brain tumors is increasing. We use the mobile phone next to our heads, although some people say that the average number of tumors is not increasing. In Holland, for example, in the UK, this other study, that the In Denmark as well, as you can see on this slide, the rate is increasing, so it probably has something to do with that. A group of doctors and researchers from different member states of the EU have tried to request a moratorium on this. I'm afraid I haven't got time to go into this. Another aspect that I did want to talk about, although I'm not going to have much time, is the behavioral changes. Today, 25% of children aged 9 have a mobile phone, 45% at the age of 11, 94% at the age of 15. 21.3% of young people are really addicted to the mobile phone, compared with 12.7% of the European mean. It's a problem all over the world. In some countries, such as France, they forbid the use of the mobile phone in schools for reasons of contamination, of pollution rather, and the disruptive consequences. That is very clear. The European Union also informs us about the behavioral addictions in young people and adolescents. So the mobile phone is like another drug in the system. And young people can't do without the mobile phones. Basically, we could mention 4 parameters. It modifies this mood, tolerance. Just like any other drug, there are abstinence systems, interpersonal conflict, and apart from the conflicts, what negative effects? Isolation from the rest of the world, all of those elements you can read on the slide. And I want to finish by saying that new technologies are a question of ethics. We cannot allow society to expose us without our permission to a level of radiation whose consequences we do not know about. It would have been a good thing for young people to be here listening to us. And one day I forgot my mobile phone for a few hours and I got to know fantastic people who say they are my family and my friends. Thank you very much. I haven't got time for anything else.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ceferino, for such an interesting, detailed, and an eye-opener to us all. Our next speaker is José Ramón Obeso Suárez. He is the Vice President for Research of the University of Oviedo and Professor of Ecology. He has a topic on human activity and global change. Mr. José.
Muy buenas tardes.
Good afternoon to you all. Thank you so much for being here this afternoon. At this panel, I am Mr. José Ramón Obeso. I work in research on biodiversity. It is a mixed center with the participation of the University of Oviedo and the Higher Council for Research, Scientific Research. For me, it is a great honor to be with you all. I'm going to tell you something about human activity and the global change. I'd like to tell you what global change is about, the main components, mainly the changes in terms of the use of soil or territory, the modification of the biogeochemical cycles and how they are resulting in climate change. Then we will see about the effects of this climate change on human, on beings, on beings alive, and then what we can do about it. Global change. They are planetary alterations due to human activities, anthropic activities. Why can we modify the planet globally? Well, human population has grown exponentially in recent decades. We are 7,500 human beings on the planet right now, and according to the forecasts of science, we will be 8 million inhabitants on the planet before 2024. So if we are more and more human beings and we consume more and more power and energy, we have a greater capacity to have an impact on the planet. And how do we do it? Well, by means of changing the uses of the soil or territories, that is, territories that initially were devoted to specific activity, usually with natural vegetation, they move on to another kind of activity. And then we can also alter the cycles of the elements, mainly that of the carbon and nitrogen. And in this modification of natural cycles, we produce greenhouse effect gases. Changes in terms of the use of soil or properties or territory is illustrated by this slide. To the left, we can see a territory covered by natural vegetation. This natural vegetation stores or captures carbon on the upper part and also the soil. And the amount of the carbon on the air and underground is more or less equal. What happens when that natural vegetation is eliminated to obtain some soil for farming activities or urban activities that you see here to the right? When you eliminate the vegetation, then that vegetation is decomposed and the carbon inside will be transformed into carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, but not only in the atmosphere but also the soil. Once the vegetation is eliminated, the decomposition of the soil continues. Carbon is breathed by microorganisms and then it is moved on to the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. We are emitting between 1.5 and 1.9 petagrams of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And if, as well as that, we send the carbon sequestered in the fossil fuels, then the problem is greater. Here you have a picture illustrating an exploitation of soil outdoors, and you can see natural vegetation has been eliminated, so we lost the carbon on the soil. And we are now taking carbon from the underground, and by means of combustion of fossil fuels, we send to the atmosphere 7.7 pgc, thousands of millions of tons of carbon, more than 9 pgs per year. Although terrestrial ecosystems have capacity to sequester these emissions of the atmosphere, 40% of them is increased every year. And the result of it all is that we face an increase in carbon dioxide, and currently we have more than 400 parts per million, and they are the greatest amount on planet in the last 800 million years, and the greatest values probably in the last 20,000 million years. And that is leading to climate change, because this carbon dioxide has the capacity to capture the heat, and climate is changing globally. And that is illustrated by the reports launched by the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. More than 85 countries collaborate in this panel, and the documents launched are the result of a consensus of the whole scientific community. And what they have published in the last report is that when the values are increased in the ocean and continents, we see the following. We can see as from the half of the 19th century to current times, an increase in temperature has occurred. And this increase could be questioned because initially there were some oscillations, but look at the last 4 decades. The increase in temperature is very clear. Crystal clear, ladies and gentlemen. So why is climate changing? Well, climate change is, because it is the norm throughout the history of the planet, it has been changing due to natural reasons or causes. The radiation on Earth varies depending on the position of Earth. So there are some astronomical cycles, like for example, cyclotrophic cycles. There are also changes in solar activity. A previous speaker mentioned it, but they are not so significant regarding the climate change. But what is very important is changes in volcanic activities, because they also send ashes and increase radiation that reaches the planet. However, what is the difference between the current climate change and the one that happened somewhere else on the planet or in the past in the planet? Well, the climate change has never happened at such a speed. And then causality. The current one is due to the emission of greenhouse effect gases. These greenhouse effect gases, the most important ones are CO2, CH4, or N2O. So all these gases are very important. For example, methane or some NOs, nitrogen oxides, that have a greater capacity of capturing heat than carbon dioxide. And which human activities are responsible for these greenhouse effect gases? Well, here you can see how certain activities in red, reddish or yellowish have to do with the use of energy emissions and needs of energy or power to carry out human activities. However, the other activities in green colors right below, and they have to do with farming activities, agriculture. Very important issue to differentiate, because we could stop using energy or power, but we cannot allow ourselves to stop feeding ourselves. We need to feed ourselves. Let's have a look at the activities causing this global warming. Yellow, energy. 1/4 of the problem is due to that. Industry, transport, 14% each of them. And then let's have a look at the non-energetic emissions. As we saw before, the changes in the use of soil leads to the fact that carbon goes to the atmosphere, and it causes 20% of the global warming issue. But there are other agricultural or farming activities, for example, some cultures producing methane, for example, rice cultures, or also methane emissions due to animal or cattle farming. What are the forecasts? Well, it's very difficult to forecast or foresee what's going to happen, not because we cannot calculate how much the temperature will increase due to greenhouse effect gases, but because we do not know how human beings will behave in the future, whether we will continue behaving like that or no. So when experts of this intergovernmental panel to analyze the climate change study what will happen in the future, they design or envisage different scenarios. Here to the left, we have a scenario of low emissions, limited emissions. So if we reduce the emissions, for example, or if new technological innovations were developed to reduce greenhouse effect gases, then we would have the situation to the left. Temperature of the planet to the end of the century, to 2081, 2100, then will be limited. But if we continue behaving as now, then we have the situation, the scenario to the right. Here you can see to the right, the temperature could increase by 5 degrees or even more. What are the consequences? Well, the effects of temperature rise have to do with the modification of rainfall on the planet Earth. In some places it will rain more, in other places it will rain less. Mediterranean area, for example, rainfall will be reduced by 30 or 40%, so there will be important changes, very important changes. And there will be important changes regarding ecosystems. They are already happening, and they will affect biodiversity and feeding, human feeding, human food, because sometimes we forget that anytime we eat something, it comes from an alive being. Also, probability of extreme climatic events, and probability of, for example, typhoons, hurricanes, etc. But let's focus on the effects of climate change on ecosystems. Firstly, an increase in temperature will lead to changes in the areas of species distributions. They are distributed regarding the thermal needs and moisture needs. An increase in temperature will lead to the fact that some species will drag away and they will go to areas with greater latitude or altitude. They will go to the mountains. As not all the species have the same capacity to move around, so some disruptions will happen. There will be disadjustments. So imagine an interaction between a plant and a pollinizer will produce fruit, but if they cannot move around at the same speed, they will not meet each other, and there will not be that interaction. That interaction will not occur, and that increase in temperature will also have an impact on plants, on production of plants. It is estimated that studies going back to the 2004 estimate that 24% of the species studied have been deployed. For every 1 degree increase in temperature, the species will move 100 kilometers to the north. Green, the area of distribution, imagine, of a species of a plant. In red, animal. So an increase in 1 degree, the animal will move northwards 100 kilometers. Plants can also move a little bit to the north, but not 100 kilometers, because they don't have such a capacity of mobility. They will occupy a different area, and that will lead a disruption of interaction. They will not meet each other. So the plant will not survive, pollinizer will not survive.
The same occurs in the mountain systems. Here we can see a mountain system. The distribution area in orange as warming is going to have to move towards higher areas in the mountainous systems. And this has occurred, is occurring, and is affecting many species, such as the pollinization species. We can see that these more than 30 different species in the Iberian mountain range occupied a large area in the 1980s. 20 years later, we found that they are only in the higher areas of the mountain range. So these species have disappeared in the lower areas, and so the plants that also disappear because they can't be pollinized. So now we are going to have a look at what effects all of this has on the plants. In principle, plants require water, nutrients, and solar radiation. So with an increase in temperature, one would think that plants wouldn't be affected. But of course, they are also affected by water and the nutrients. So what is going to happen in the agricultural ecosystems? Well, there are 3 species that should concern us a good deal. more intensely because they comprise 50% of the calories our intake of calories. And these come from these three cereals: rice, wheat, and corn, or maize. What is going to occur with these? Well, based on an exhaustive, comprehensive analysis carried out in 2014, what of the changes in harvests or crops due to an increase in temperature, what would the change be in these crops? In the green line, we can see the situation where there are no limitations of water and hydrogen. But if we have a look at the predictions on a global scale throughout the planet, we would have a look at the red lines. And that is a reduction in crops of those three cereals, mainly due to water stress and lack of nutrients too. In the planets of 1 billion people, well, the main harvest crops are going to be produced less. But the main problem is that are the pests. All plants can have problems, and rice, maize, or corn, or wheat, they're all affected by pests. And they produce damage in these crops, and there's a reduction of 50% in production. In the case of rice, the reduction is even more drastic. It could reach even 70% reduction. What would happen with an increase in temperature? Well, based on a study that was published a couple of weeks ago, here we can see the loss in agroecosystems based on an increase in losses of crops, an increase in temperature. We can see that all the pests are going to have an effect on all these crops. And why? Well, it's very simple. An increase in temperature is going to increase the metabolic rate of these insects, and they're going to grow more quickly, and they're going to reproduce more quickly. Therefore, the effects will be greater. But the higher metabolic rate also leads to a greater consumption of vegetation, because the digestive system is going to require more. So the effects are clear. Summing up, this could be 10 to 15 or 25% rather of the crop will be lost, in contrast with what happens today, with an increase in 1 degree in temperature. With 2 degrees increase in temperature, we can see that the loss of wheat will be 46%. These analyses, comprehensive analyses, are considering what is going to occur at planet level, seeing the prediction for each of the squares of the planet, that we can see that mankind can be compromised. So what can we do? Well, the first key question is that the solutions implemented must be carried out at a global level, a global scale. Here we can't take into account just local solutions. Everything has to be done at a global scale. Another aspect that I trust in are technological solutions. There must be some sort of technological development that will enable us to use energies that don't create greenhouse gases, or others that enable us to harness these. The most important aspect is going to be a radical change in human culture. And this should lead us to reduce energy consumption, a drastic reduction, and also a reduction in the footprint of agriculture. Because, as we all know, the greenhouse gas effects are caused by agriculture. And regarding this reduction of the footprint of agriculture, we should eliminate or at least reduce the crops with a greater footprint, such as rice, for example. We should also reduce or eliminate crops for animal production. That is, consume those crops ourselves, because in the case of animals, it's not efficient because we lose the energy. There's an energy loss. This animal production also produces greenhouse gases. Another case is the eliminate crops for biofuel. And animal feed consumes 1/3 of the animal production and biofuel 10%. Another key question that we have to develop over the coming decades is to be more efficient in terms of the use of fertilizers, because many of them end up in our water systems or in the atmosphere as greenhouse gases in some cases, and also reduce the use of waste. And also reduce waste. 1/4 of the agriculture production in the planet is wasted. Summing up, what I wanted to transmit today is that human activity is causing changes in the planet, and these changes have to do with modification in the use of the territory. We have modified the biogeochemical cycles in carbon, for example, not just due to the use of territory, but the use of fossil fuels, and this is causing climate change whose effects are being felt today. Global warming is occurring, and we must remember that the predictions are going to depend on the emission scenario, how we must behave in the future. These changes are going to affect us in a severe manner. As we have seen, they're going to affect the harvest that we depend upon, and they're also going to lead to a loss of biodiversity with all the services they provide. We have also seen that there will be a reduction in crops because there will be less productivity, and also due to the effects of pests. And the solution lies in reducing energy consumption and organic footprint. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. José Ramón. It is indeed very touching to see how mankind is on a mission to self-destruction. What we are looking at as some of the problems which will be able to come because of climatic change. For some of us, those problems are already there. It is mostly the poorest countries who are facing the problems today. For example, in most of the countries where we only depend on agriculture, and already now we are having problems with the rain. If there is no rainfall, it is hunger. A lot of people are suffering because of malnutrition. This is not tomorrow. This will not happen tomorrow. For some of us, it is happening now. And it is not only food, but we are also looking at the problem of water. We have been trying to drill boreholes for people. But because we do not have enough rainfall, we are seeing that the boreholes are drying up and the people do not have water to drink. This is also continuing. Because of the same, we are having floods now and again. And because of the floods and the poor sanitary measures in our communities, we see a lot of diarrhea diseases. We see a lot of children having diarrhea diseases. We see a lot of outbreaks of malaria and the like. So this really calls for a multidisciplinary action. It is everybody's responsibility. It is not for tomorrow. It has to start today. It has to start now, because the change for some of us is not tomorrow. We are already seeing the negative impact of climatic change. Thank you very much, Mr. José Ramón. At this time, I hand over to my colleague, Luis Pasco, to continue.
Sí, llegados a este punto.
Having reached this point in the session, I would like to thank the two speakers, Obeso and Maestú, for talking about these different aspects. And it is now time to open up the floor so that you can ask any questions or give an opinion on something that has been mentioned, any of the aspects mentioned in the two presentations. We've got around 10 minutes because we have to start the second round table at 7:20. So now is the time. You've got to open a Q&A session, or even those of you on the panel, if you want to mention any more aspects or talk about something that hasn't been mentioned already. Any questions from the floor? I think very interesting topics and controversial aspects have been mentioned that affect all of us and the immediate future of our environment and of mankind. Therefore, maybe, I think there's a question over there. Marcelo? Mr. Maestro has left a lot of things unsaid. Maybe he could tell us a little bit more about, or go into greater depth about some of the aspects. Yes, I didn't have time to tell you everything I wanted to do. But this is a lecture, a congress rather, on bioethics. And regard to the youth and young people, children, we are teaching them things regarding bioethics. The technology today is a great advance. It's going to mean everything in the future. But we must also tell the young people that the technology has its limits and its consequences. And this is something that is not being mentioned. The mobile is used as something that's used every day. People don't think about what is the consequences of all of this. We've got these antennae that have been set up, and all these electromagnetic fields. Any kind of radiation can affect our system, our cells, our behavior, the cognitive system. Do you really believe that driving and using your mobile phone at the same time causes distraction? Or do you think we should look for other effects? Other studies tell us that radiation of the mobile system is giving rise to changes in the response time faced with an event. We were told that the reaction time is reduced by 20% if we're using the mobile phone at the same time. You aren't distracted, but what happens, it is affecting your normal cognitive process, often when we do other daily activities. And the other part that I didn't have much time to go into detail is the addiction. We've tried to do a couple of studies on what happens if we take the mobile phones away from the adolescents. At a school, we took a group of students who had mobiles, another group that did not. And the study was based on a month to see what happened. We couldn't finish the study because a day and a half later, the group without the mobile phone were anxious. It created angst. And so the response of those adolescents, they needed to use the mobile phone on every minute, to see who sent a WhatsApp, see who sent a message, or if somebody phoned them. They need to look at it every minute and a half. This is an addiction, and we consider this to be a pathogenic. We must think that this generation of the future, is somebody going to be able to teach them that this is maybe going to give rise in behavioral changes? Nobody talks about the consequences of all of this. We've seen the experience of tobacco, saying that smoking kills. Does people stop smoking because of those messages? No, it has to form part of the information process of education. So for me, it's an ethical problem, because ethics affects the capacity of the authorities to inform the population and them to know the consequences of all of this, because they are being exposed to radiation without having been asked about it. Because people often say, no, nothing's going to happen. And there's little information. We do a lot of things, and I say we ignore the consequences of all these things, or the majority of things. I think there is another question over there. At the back. Sorry. Congratulations on the presentations of the two. My question is for Mr. Maestro. What country regulates the installation of the telephone systems, the distances from population and the people? Which is the country that regulates it the most? I've showed you a chart. There's one thing that I've seen and I would like a change to occur, and that is the distance. The important thing is the radiation, the emission rate of that radiation. Because often when it's confusing, you've got a large antenna nearby, and at the beginning of my conference, I showed you a chart for you to see the difference between what Wi-Fi, how much that affects you. And these are things that aren't taken into consideration. The second thing, that there are countries who've listened to the scientists. There are countries that have started to change their legislation, their regulation to respond to all of this. Italy, in the year 2007, brought out a Law 40, that blocked the expansive growth of telephony, limiting radiation to 10 microvats. In Switzerland, too, they limit it to 0.5, any type of radiation, that is. In Russia, 5 microvats. And in China, there are a lot of countries that have listened to the scientists. The way of using the mobile phone hasn't changed. The procedures haven't changed. You don't have to reach such great limits. But in Europe, the European Union, in the year 2002, or maybe starting in 2001, gave some recommendations to all states in line with the Non-Ionizing Council, said that the only possible effect of the electromagnetic fields was the thermal effects, because with respect to the rest, there was no scientific evidence. And of course, that is disputable. There were lots of studies, but none seemed to be so important as to consider this aspect, because you have to start up the precautionary principle, and that is to have the lowest levels or limits possible. Europe, in France, Germany, Holland, and in Spain, we have the same limits. These limits are quite high, in my opinion. In other countries, they are more greater regulated. What is going to happen in the future? Well, everything is going to have to be regulated with this new 5G, because the radiation rate is going to increase considerably, although we don't know how much. We can imagine that the general rate is going to be multiplied by 10 or even by 100, but we don't have studies to predict this. The prognosis hasn't been carried out by the companies either. It's more important to launch the system, then we'll see what happens. For the companies, that is. One final question. Hello? For Professor Maestro? Related to Wi-Fi, schools, public centres. What is your opinion? Because the children's brains are maturing, and if they are exposed to that risk from a very early age, Wi-Fi, the antenna, and what are there any evidence? Well, first of all, the children brains aren't so different to us. It affects us all. The only difference is the phase. There should be special protection in the development phase, that is, a fetus. It is very important to take measures, and also up to the age of 1. But I think in other ages, the consequences are going to be similar. What is true is that the effect on children is a biological one, but also behavioral effect. In France, where they've forbidden the use of mobile phones at schools, the use of Wi-Fi has also been forbidden in the majority of French schools. And there has been a lot of social pressure, especially this has mainly been due to behavior. The attention capacity changes with the use of the mobile phone, and I'm in favor of this being done in Spain too. When I give classes at the university, I find it difficult to maintain the attention of my students, because they're always using the mobile phone. So often I have to forbid them the use of mobile phones, so it's disruptive. Another thing I think we should establish in Spain, I think it's been discussed in the parliament, and that is the prohibition of the use of mobile phones in primary and secondary, and also libraries and use of university. I would be in favor of that, not just because of the biological consequences, but for the behavioral consequences. Finally, I don't know if either the members of the panel want to give any conclusions, final conclusions, or I would like to add one thing. I think it is important that the scientific society, the Bioethics Society, and this type of organization should stress this matter on the politicians, for them to take initiatives regarding what can happen in the future. It is important to establish the dosimetric levels and see what is happening, and in advance. It's easy to know. We have to know not just what is happening now, but what is going to happen in the future. So we have to measure and know how to measure. And anybody who has problems, ask for measurements to be taken, because that is the way of preventing against what can happen in the future. So with that then, thank you very much. Messrs. Obeso, Maestú. If Mr. Devline wants to say a few words before the next round table, do you want to finish off?
Just to thank all of you for your active participation, and to thank all the speakers for very beautiful presentations. Once again, thank you very much.